Guys, back with part two of Peak Roland Smith, chapters I think 13 and 14. So I think we're going to finish 13, and then we'll do chapter 14. That's a quick one, and then we'll look at the activities you have to do this week. Okay, last where we left off, Holly was offering Peak to stay with her in her tent. Interesting. Let's continue. Right here. This was returned with a genuine scowl. Oh, Peak turned her down. This was returned with a genuine scowl. I didn't care. There was no way I was going to become her tent mate. But you will have your meals with me, she said, as if it wasn't even the question. I was open to question. I was holding the plate of noodles, which had cooled and congealed and wasn't looking its best at the moment. Not every meal I hedged, but yeah, I'll eat with you once in a while. Her scowl deepened, and I think she was about to say something nasty, but I was saved by Josh coming into the tent. Okay, people, he announced. Tomorrow we head up to ABC. A cheer went up. It'll take us 3 days and 2 nights to get there, if everything goes well. We'll spend 2 nights at ABC, if you remember ABC is Advanced Base Camp. Then come back down. You know the routine. Climb high, sleep low, the team chanted in unison. Leah, will you check Leah will check you tonight to get a baseline on your blood, etc. Ben, check you again up at ABC to see how you're doing. The news was met with much less enthusiasm. She's waiting for you in the aid tent. He pinned a sheet of paper to the tent pole. She wrote down your exam times. Don't be late. Hail Hitler, a climber muttered under his breath. Josh shot him a look, and he turned bright red. Nobody got up to the summit unless the expedition leader said they were going up. It was best to stay on the captain's good side. What about the puja ceremony? Somebody asked. A puja is a Buddhist blessing ritual that most climbing parties went through prior to getting up to the mountain. Really quick, here's a picture. They have all these different colored flags. It explains later in this chapter or next chapter what the flags are for. This is kind of what it'll look like. You see these all over mountains when you're out in Nepal, especially. We're right here. We'll be going up to ABC 2 more times in the next few weeks, Josh said. We'll hold our puja before one of those. I want to get an early start tomorrow. A couple of the Sherpas didn't look too happy about skipping the puja. Pack just enough food for the trip, Josh continued. It will be hard. It will be a hard climb, and you don't want to be carrying any more weight than necessary. The speech ended, and the climbers gathered around the sheet. Josh walked over to Holly and me. You two won't be coming, he said. I'm holding JR, Jack, and Will back too. You haven't acclimatized enough to go higher. Then why don't you wait a few days? Holly asked. We can all go up together. It was a good question, mostly because I couldn't imagine being stuck at camp alone with Holly for the next several days. Josh lowered his voice. I'd like nothing better than to wait, but most of these people have been here for weeks. If I don't get them higher, they'll riot. A third of them have only signed up for ABC. When we come back down, they're gone, which will make this a lot easier around here. I'll take you up to ABC as soon as I get back down. I can't hold them back because of latecomers. Mhm. The next chapter is called Latecomers. Josh's absence wasn't as bad as I thought, although Zopo worked Sunjo and me like dogs. The morning Josh headed up to the mountain, he had us build a 6 foot tall cairn out of rocks around a central flag for the puja blessing ceremony. We then placed smaller pots on the ground around the main pole and strung up dozens of prayer flags between them on strings. The flags come in 5 colors: red, green, yellow, blue, and white, representing the Earth's 5 elements: fire, wood, earth, water, and iron. As the flags flutter in the wind, they release the prayers written on them and pacify the gods. So yeah, that's what we were looking at before. There's like a pole or a main flag in the middle and uh, a bunch of other flags hung around it. Pretty cool. When we finished, Josh had Sun Joe and me gather gear from our team's tents and lean it against the cairn to be blessed. Zopa held the ceremony that evening for a German and Italian climbing party going up the next morning, and for our group in absentia, that means that because they're absent, which he said wasn't ideal, but it sometimes worked. He recited several Buddhist prayers, then asked the mountain for permission for us to climb it, in German, English, and Italian, which was impressive. The ceremony took about 3 hours, and just as it was ending, a blackbird landed on the main flagpole, which Zopa said was very auspicious. What kind of bird was that? I asked as we headed back to camp. It looked kind of like a crow or a raven. Sunjo shrugged. Ooh, crow or raven. It turned out that even though Holly Angelo was right next door to me, she was relatively easy to avoid. She never left her tent before 10. I was out of mind by 7 every morning because there were so many people in the camp. It was easy to get lost among the tents, unless you were Holly, who wore the most garish colored snowsuits on the slope. I could pick her out a mile away and hide. She did manage to snag me for dinner the fourth night. Josh was gone. I made the mistake of heading back to my tent to drop off my ice axe before dinner. Zopa had been giving Sunjo and me self-arrest lessons, and Holly was waiting for me like a guard dog. The food was better than what they offered at the mess tent, but the atmosphere was grim. Ralph sat on his massage chair with a permanent pout on his face, as if he were waiting for customers he knew would never come. Chef Pierre watched every bite of food I took and muttered about the barbaric cooking conditions at 18,000 feet. And Holly? Well, my headache came back, but it wasn't from the altitude. Inside a tent, her voice was shrill enough to sour yak butter. She was no longer gasping, which I missed because the pauses gave my ears a chance to rest. I thought she was going to interview me, but it turned out that I was there to listen to her interview herself. During the 2 hour nonstop monologue, she filled me in on her life, year by boring year. I didn't really start tuning in until she turned 18, but even then it wasn't very interesting. She'd been married 3 times, and her current husband lived in Rome, and she barely saw him. She came from a wealthy family and didn't have to work for a living. She became a journalist, as she called it, against her father's wishes because she felt it was her moral responsibility to tell the truth. I didn't mention that in the article she'd written about us, there were several things that were blatantly untrue. I also think she exaggerated her climbing conquests, because when I asked her what mountain she had climbed, she said, "You know, all the big ones," and quickly changed the subject to dreams, asking if I ever have them. Yeah? Well, let me tell you about one I had just last night, she said. I hate hearing about people's dreams, but I was spared by the arrival of William Blade and 3 bodyguards the size of yetis. In his films, William Blade had been shot, stabbed, starved, beaten, and tortured, but he had never looked worse than when he hobbled into Holly's tent. His back went out, one of the bodyguards explained. We were wondering if your massage therapist could put him right. Oh, of course, Holly said, pushing things out of the way, including me, to make room. Ralph smiled for the first time since he arrived on the mountain and gleefully began laying out liniments and lotions and flexing his muscles, which weren't very impressive. I stayed long enough to watch them get Blade out of his clothes and onto the table, where he started yelling and swearing at everybody in the tent, as if we were personally responsible for his bad luck, or his bad back. I didn't see what happened the next day. Zopa had Sunjo and me climbing a treacherous ice fall outside camp, but we heard all about it when we got back that afternoon. After Ralph worked his magic on the film hero's back, Blade offered to pay him twice as much as Holly was paying to move over to his camp. Apparently, Ralph couldn't get his gear together fast enough. When Pierre saw this, he begged Blade to take him too, which he did, leaving Holly absolutely alone in her giant pink tent, screaming in rage. The bet was she was going to quit the mountain. The only person who put cash down on her staying was Zopa. He met everyone's wager with the money he had gotten from his cigarette sales. It was hours after the incident before Holly emerged from her tent. It turned out that she wasn't about to head home to her Upper East Side penthouse apartment. We were in the mess tent waiting to hear from Josh and the team up at ABC. They were supposed to leave that morning for base camp, but got pinned down by a snowstorm. We had heard that some of the people up there had HAPE, but the storm, which is altitude sickness, but the storm had knocked out further radio communication. So we didn't know who was sick or how bad it was. If the team wasn't able to start down the next day, the situation could turn critical. They had brought only enough food for 2 days at ABC. A couple of the Sherpas were talking about hauling up some food for them. Not tonight, Zopa said. The storm is moving down the mountain. The Sherpas and a small group of other climbers were arguing with Zopa about his weather prediction when Holly sauntered into the mess tent. I'm going to the top, she announced calmly, and walked over and got a plate of food. The only person smiling was Zopa, and why not? He had just won a pot of money, literally. The mess cook had been keeping the bets in a 10-gallon rice cooker, which was now overflowing with rupees. Sunjo had told me that if Zopa won the bet, he would give the money to the Tibetan monks. They would have to wait to get their cash. I didn't know this yet, but just like Holly, Zopa had no plans to go home anytime soon. The snow is here, one of the Sherpas said. That's impossible, I said. I hadn't been in the tent more than 20 minutes. When I walked over from HQ, there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The cook pulled the flap back, and we stared outside in disbelief. The snow was so thick, I wasn't sure how I was going to be able to find my tent. Oh, crazy stuff. Storms coming. Holly's not doing so great. And Josh and a bunch of the other amateur climbers are stuck at advanced base camp. All right, guys, what you need to do for me is, oh, I'm having trouble here. This is Peak Worksheet 3. First thing I want to look at is similes. I think I mentioned this before. And you've got an example here. So there's an example from the page. It says, they were 6 years old and looked up to the third P, me, like I was a god. So the author is comparing Peak to a god, right? It looked up to me like a god. So Peak like a god. And how does this help you understand? It helps you understand how much the twin sisters love Peak. Okay, so use this simile, use this comparison as an exaggeration, but it helps us understand just how much these little girls love Peak. So we got some other examples. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we got 5 more examples. I'd like you to point out what is being compared and what does it help you understand. Okay, give those a try. And then the last page is making connections, which you've done before. I love doing it. It's very important in our reading. So you should try a text to self, something that you connect to personally in the story, text to text, and text to world. We've read quite a bit more of the story since we did this last. We're over page 100 now. So if there's anything that's come up, any character, any event, whatever that you can connect to, or connect it to a movie or a TV show or a book you've seen, stuff like that, do your best to do that. Okay? The only other worksheet, which you might have already done, was this peak climbing equipment activity challenge thing, where you're supposed to go on to this website, or you could really just Google it. It's no big deal, right? If you can't find one on this website, and it should tell you, what do these different climbing equipment things do. So I'd like you just really in like one sentence. What does it do? What are ascenders? What are balaclava? Beef stew. Oh, what's that? Camping tent, stuff like that. And then just get the cost. And when you get the cost, and it's going to have decimals in it, because this week we're doing decimals, I'd like you to kind of total it all up. So it's going to help you practice adding up decimals. This will also give us a good idea of what really just how expensive all this stuff is that Josh bought for Peak and what equipment exactly all these people are talking about and all they have on the mountain, which is pretty neat. Okay, so take a look at that stuff. If it takes too long, don't worry about it. Okay, don't have to finish it all. Do your best. Have a great week and weekend, and I'll see you guys later.